Today we're talking about a topic that I feel like a maybe shadow side of spirituality, which is the spiritual traps. Maybe before we get into what they are, how to identify them, and different kind of types of them, can you talk a bit more on what is a spiritual trap?
Well, so that is definitely what it's commonly referred to. And a different way to look at that would be, hey, if I've gone through 6 levels of a video game and I kept getting stuck in one place or getting stuck in another place and falling in a pit or something, it could be very helpful for me in the future to look back and say, hey, here's all these pits that you don't have to fall in so that you can get to the end more quickly with less suffering. And the reason we call it a trap is because it's just an easy place for the ego. Not that we're villainizing the ego. We love our egos. We need our egos like anything. Everything's a spectrum. So the ego can be very healthy or the ego can be unhealthy. It can be conscious or unconscious. No judgment of where it is. It's all just information. But when we look at a concept like spirituality, what we're calling spirituality, New Ageism, as a sort of dogmatic religion, it's easy to fall into certain traps. For instance, if we refer back to our episode about love and belonging, and that being the number one need of the human species, and in order to think that we experience love and belonging, we do everything we can to fit in, which is rejecting any part of us that doesn't fit the self-concept created by what got us approval in childhood. So if you're struggling and suffering and you're looking for a higher meaning and to understand and you're attracted to spirituality, perfectly understandable. But all of a sudden now, your ego or your self-concept has this new, like, higher standard to behold in order to fit in. So what can happen is it can be this sort of trap of, now instead of looking at how to integrate your subconscious parts, now you're shoving them either further away because they don't fit your self-concept of enlightenment, love and light, positivity only. You have to eat the same, drink the same, talk the same, wear the same crystal bracelets, believe the same thing. And anybody who doesn't believe that is unconscious or asleep or not good enough or not enlightened enough or a low level of consciousness or whatever. So you're just trading in the judgment and separation and social standards for like this whole even harder to live up to, less inclusionary form. And I'm not saying this is all spirituality, and acknowledge that spirituality itself is just a word that we're using to describe something. So, and these are not in form of judgment. These are just observations of how easy it has become to escape into the dogma of spirituality as a way to feel like we fit in, rather than a more inclusionary understanding of it, which is accepting all the parts of ourselves, especially those that don't fit our concept of self, so that we can grow, integrate, and heal those parts and not need to judge or project them onto others.
And so speaking on ego, can you talk a bit more on that sense of superiority that sometimes might come with starting to evolve and starting to reach higher levels of consciousness? What are some of maybe you can talk a bit more on that, like, ego trap that can happen and maybe how to avoid it?
For sure. So an ego that is not yet developed into its divinity wants to be seen as divine. It wants to be better than. So for instance, in my 20s, I would say things like, oh, it's so hard to be around people that are so, much less whatever than me. Or I see a lot of people trying to figure out, what is my level of consciousness? Is it better than others' consciousness? Or I see in certain circles where they're like, I am more awakened or enlightened or better at being love and light than that person. So it can just be spirituality or new ageism or any separate paradigm of thinking can be just a really delicious place for the ego to hide. And then we can develop that spiritual ego. Or people go and do which can be a very helpful, beautiful tool for some people. They go to a plant medicine journey and they're like, wait a minute, I remembered that I am God. And it's like, yes, I love that for you. You are definitely God. And so is everybody else. And so is everybody who doesn't know their God yet. And so is every person experiencing not having housing. And so is every person experiencing addiction. And so is every person that has hurt you in the past. And so is every person that you judge. So it's just more, the ego sort of trades in its old shirt for like a really new fancy shirt that even has these higher standards to live up to. So it's about who's the most woke, the most spiritual, the most enlightened, the most, developed in those areas as a way to measure ourselves, to validate our self-worth rather than making our self-worth intrinsic by existing.
Can you talk a bit more on the difference between divine ego versus ego wanting to be divine? How to distinguish them?
That's such a good question. So you'll notice, and I would invite everybody, because the ego is going to be like, I don't have ego, right? A lot of people are like, oh, look, that person has ego. That person has ego. I don't have ego. And then it becomes this new way of like the ego playing through itself, which is okay. Again, when we have our authentic wants, needs, boundaries, and values met, the ego becomes very healthy. And when we've integrated all of our unconscious part, the ego is what helps us separate Austra from Sandy. But we want to remember that, again, we can have a healthy ego or an unhealthy ego. And we want to remember that I am an individual stream of consciousness experiencing itself as Sandy. You are Austra, you and I are separate, but we're also completely connected. And that's sort of, so on the, let's call it the grace side of ego, it would look like, I don't care if I've reached certain states that people would call enlightenment or whatever you want to call them. Because once you experience some of those states and you truly, to the core of your being, understand at the cellular level your connection to everyone and everything, you don't actually feel like, haha, I'm here and you're not. Haha, I win, I'm better. What you actually feel is, oh my God. Or at least for me, it's more like, oh my gosh, everyone is a part of me. And as long as one of them is still suffering, I want everybody to get to experience this together because they are me. So if you notice, I would always suggest to people, this is what I do. I always ask myself, in what ways is my ego trying to manipulate to get a need met, or trying to help me become aware of a weakness that I'm being guided to strengthen? Because if we just go, ego's bad, then we think that it's bad to have ego and we become ashamed of it, which actually prevents us from doing the work that we need to do to become less fear and more love, or less unintegrated and more graceful. So we can ask ourselves, in what ways am I doing this? Because if you just say, am I doing this? The ego will say, no, you're not. You're good. But they're doing it and they're doing it and they're doing it, but not you, because you're good and they're bad. So you'll notice judgment. So I can look at somebody and say, oh, they're deeply in their shadow. Their ego has taken over, but I don't feel upset by it any longer. I feel curious and compassionate. And I always lay it back to a time, when is the time I've done that? Oh, they're acting angry and belligerent. I've been angry and belligerent, not like in a spiritually codependent way, like, oh, if they're doing it, I'm doing it, but sort of more of like a curiosity and compassion and trying to understand what their behavior is telling you about where they are. So it would look less like, so this is how I often see it look. Ugh, I wish everybody would just wake up. How can all these 3D people be so stupid? And that's okay. That's okay. Where they are is a valid stage too. That's a valid stage to be at. So if you notice you're at that stage, I celebrate you because you're now in awareness. That's perfect. You're nailing it. Wherever you are on this, it's perfect. There's no wrong way to evolve. There's no wrong place to be in evolution. Nobody's getting left behind. It's just helpful information. So if you're in grade 8 and you meet somebody in grade 2, you don't go, ugh, grade 2, you're so stupid. You're coloring in coloring books. Oh my gosh, I don't know. Do you even understand quantum mechanics? Can you even write an essay? No, they can't. They're in grade 2. You were in grade 2, and I always assume whatever level they're at, I was probably 100 times more obnoxious than they are in that level. And I always assume at any given time that there's tons of levels that I haven't unlocked yet that I still have to look at, that people are looking back at me going, she's ridiculous. And that just sort of keeps me like in humor and acceptance. So if you notice that spiritual ego, that's amazing. That is such good news. That means that you know exactly and specifically where to do the work. And it means that you have clarity that part of you still doesn't feel good enough. And part of you still in the comparison trap, which is amazing. Because then when you see other people doing it, like when I see other people doing it, I'm like, I get it. I've done it. I've totally done it. And I
What
assume there's other things that I'm doing right now that I'm not aware of yet. That in the future, I'll be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that.
what are some of the things that maybe for men listening that might be, let's say, in a bit higher grade compared to maybe some people in their lives, that they could do or remind themselves to help to navigate that? Because I feel like a lot of times initially it can be quite triggering and until, or like annoying even,
Yeah.
and it can trigger
Yeah.
some kind of negative emotions or even frustration.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways how that can be like navigated?
Well, first of all, I would invite them to look at the nuances. Do they feel kind of lonely? Because I've definitely experienced that where I feel like, so if you're more than, I know this from being intellectually gifted, that if you're more than 1 or 2 standard deviations above the bulk of the curve, you have a hard time relating to the bulk of the curve, and they have a hard time relating to you. And since the higher up in level of consciousness you get, not higher isn't better, but kind of, the more you're aware of your desire for connection with others. So it can almost have this unusual flavor of loneliness. So ask yourself, am I feeling lonely, frustrated, misunderstood? Or am I judging where they are in their journey? Because the more we make somebody in our life feel like they're behind or like they're not good enough, the slower their awakening process is going to be, because we're going to make them feel shame and separated. So it's finding people that can nourish you and meet you where you're at, and accepting that where everybody else is perfect. And if they're not asking for your help and they're not asking to grow and evolve, then it's none of your business what level they're at, because that's between them and their higher self on they've chosen their curriculum for Earth School. Now, I like to think of myself as a spiritual farmer. So I do plant seeds, and I'm not afraid to say things that make people uncomfortable, but I'm very accountable that I'm doing it with love and not judgment. And I understand that sometimes people will get very triggered or reactive or oppositional or lash out sometimes at that information because it challenges their self-concept. So I just lovingly plant a seed, and then I trust that if it's in their highest good for that seed to grow, it'll grow when it's ready. And if I'm judging how long that takes, then I'm the one out of alignment, because I'm judging or I'm creating. I think that their life experience should look like this so that I feel better, which just means I have more work to do. And it's okay. It's not work and then like that's bad and we have to fix it. We don't want to go into like, I have to get to the next level and the next level and the next level to be good enough. It's more like when we're in authentic alignment and we're actively seeking to integrate our parts, and we're eating our shit sandwiches, we're going to naturally level up in the game because we're going to become less fear and more love. And we're going to become more similar to the vibration of consciousness, love, God, the universe, which just naturally means we're going to see things differently.
And with speaking on like some negative emotions, can you talk a bit more on that? I feel like it's a quite common assumption that spirituality and even like on last week's topic, spiritual awakening should feel good, or there's only good emotions involved. Can you talk a bit more on that trap, and what are some of the ways that it can be avoided, or even how we can look at it differently?
Yeah. So here's the thing. It's a little bit of a paradox because we do want to somewhat focus on optimal thoughts and positive outlooks. But like anything, we can be in a pendulum swing. We don't want to take that to the point of emotional or spiritual bypassing. We're avoiding everything that is not love and light. And we're thinking, like, I see things positive vibes only. I don't want your negative vibes near me. And I think that that's understandable. And at some level, that might be somebody's boundary or their edge at that point. But I think eventually the goal is that whatever we're feeling at any given time for anybody is okay. It's not okay to take it out on other people. But polarity is part of the reason that we incarnate on this planet at this time. Now, I think we're bringing those polarities over time a little less oppositional. But if you couldn't feel anger, sadness, any of those things, how could you even know what love was? Love itself would become neutrality or boringness or nothingness. So this is an inclusionary universe. So if you're feeling nothing, that's perfect. If you're feeling angry, that's perfect. If you're feeling sad, that's perfect. If you're feeling jealous, great. All of those emotions in your navigation system are helpful. They're all valid. And as human beings, we don't want to always jump to our higher perspective and our higher self. That's one of the ways that I spiritually bypass. I go, oh, I chose this. Everything is perfect. And I sometimes invalidate my third dimension human experience who's like, I don't give a crap about all that crap. I'm suffering. I'm like, okay, that's fair, body. I'll allow that. And what people miss often is that, again, as we've said often, as Carl Jung said, what we resist persists. So if we become afraid of our negative thoughts, if we become afraid of the thoughts or emotions that we're judging as negative, instead of seeing them all as just information, what actually happens is we're suppressing them and resisting them, which is a fear action. So if we want to, when I'm in a bad mood, I'm like, I am in the most rotten, stinking bad mood. I am divinity experiencing itself as anger today. And I just go right into that experience. And therefore, for me, it passes a lot more quickly. It's like anything, right? It's like we might be releasing old emotional beach balls from decades ago. So if we're going to suppress those or judge them or be afraid of them because we think that they're not good enough or we judge them as negative, then that's a very helpful sign to us that that's where we could maybe do a little bit more work.
Can you maybe talk a bit more on the kind of how to find the balance between feeling the emotions versus them taking over?
Yeah. So I think if we approach everything with a little bit of a sense of humor, a lot of acceptance, and just loving whatever comes up, like say a part of you is really angry or a part of you is really jealous, and you go, oh my God, I'm not going to feel you. You are so unspiritual or you are so unevolved. Positive vibes only, buddy. And we condemn him or we condemn that emotion. Do you see how that's like it's not a love and belonging. It's not an inclusionary energy. It's a fear energy, and it's a shaming that part of yourself or denying it. So if a part of you is feeling a certain way and you just sit with it and you go, okay, I got you. We don't want to get addicted to it. We don't want to stay in there forever, because sometimes it could be that we're getting an ego payoff from feeling a certain way, but not always, right? We don't want to always assume that everything is one cause. We could be having emotional fluctuations because our hormones are out of balance, or our gut isn't producing serotonin, or we're exposing ourselves to pesticides or fungicides in our home. As somebody with many things that I've overcome and multiple chemical sensitivity and several autoimmune immune conditions, I know firsthand how all of these things can impact our physical avatars.
And I feel like we already started to touch on the topic of, or like one of the traps, which is emotional bypassing.
Mhm.
Can you talk a bit more on what are some of the, how does it maybe look like? And what would be some of the solutions, how to avoid it? Because similar to feeling bad emotions about feeling bad emotions or associating spirituality
Yeah,
just with the positive,
yeah,
similar in this situation, it's kind of similar where you try to suppress them or dealing with them instead of like dealing with them or addressing them.
yeah. So it's very natural for people, whether they are identified with a particular spiritual methodology or not, or a model, to want to suppress and judge emotions that we don't prefer. And so in spirituality, it's a very lovely place to do that, very easy place to do that, because we can be like, there's only love and light, positive vibes only. And then if we see others in an emotion that we are judging, because we're like, I only feel these things, positive only, then we judge them in others and we become actually more part of the problem than the solution. And if we just sort of accept that everything we feel is valid, those feelings actually become a lot more temporary. I think it was Anthony DeMello who said, before enlightenment, there was depression. And after enlightenment, there was depression. Now, as somebody who has reached a lot of those different states and those samadhi states, and I spent years in contemplation and meditation, and I'm actually more of a contemplation than meditation. To be honest, meditation isn't my tool. I do mindfulness and contemplation, although I didn't know that those were words at the time. They were just what I was aligned to do. Is when you reach those states, you do feel positive a lot more of the time. So I have been in states where I literally do only feel love and light. But I know that everything changes because energy, by the nature of energy, changes. So you can be on that high for a while where you're like, I feel connected to everything. So it can be a genuine state of being, and then other people see that and they think, oh, in order to fit in, I have to be like that too. Or I've judged myself when I've fallen out of those states in the past, where all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I don't want to feel this, because I'll tell you something. Being in those states actually makes normal states sometimes feel like there's just a way bigger contrast. So I still feel a full spectrum of emotions. It's just I bounce back to my default baseline of happiness, and I don't get triggered very often. I don't get upset even when I get upset, but I get upset and I'm like, I'm going to be more upset than any person has ever been in the history of ever. I feel that feeling. I don't suppress it. I allow it. I celebrate the divinity in it. And then it passes quite quickly. And I probably don't go into it as often, and it doesn't last as long. And I never blame it on other people. Now, I've probably done the opposite of that in the past, where I judge my own emotions, or I judge the emotions of others as less evolved or whatever, which is just a valid stage. They're all valid stages, right?
Can you maybe give an example of how spirituality can be used to avoid feeling or addressing those emotions?
So if you're aligned with or trying to fit into a paradigm that presents itself on the outside as only love and light, positive vibes only, no negative vibes allowed, and it becomes this sort of like competition to see who's the happiest and the most enlightened and the most woke and the most happy and the most zen and the least frustrated, and then it's just easy to fall into that default setting of judgment of your emotions, or only feeling the emotions that you deem worthy of your self-concept. Same as when in childhood, if we refer back to our parts work episode, We only allow the parts of ourselves that fit our self-concept have a seat at the table of our consciousness. And the other ones from the background that we're like, ugh, she's too sensitive. She's too needy. She's too girly. And we throw all those parts away. They actually, if they don't get a seat at the table of our consciousness and they don't get a chance to hold the talking stick, they're more likely to do a hostile takeover of the talking stick from our subconscious. And emotions are no different. If we're judging them and suppressing them and avoiding them, we're not only going to be less compassionate to others because wherever they are is perfect. That is their divinity. Everyone is exactly where they're meant to be. But we are also going to create that physical sensation in our body where those emotions are more likely to take over because they're like, you have not been presencing me, or you have not been whatever. And again, if we allow ourselves to feel our emotions fully, all of them that are part of this amazing human experience, then we're less likely to be overwhelmed by those emotions. But getting there is a bit of a learning curve. So we have to learn and practice how to surrender to those emotions without them taking us over. And the reason they take us over is because we are suppressing them, avoiding them, or judging ourselves for having them, instead of celebrating the divinity in all of it. And if we're celebrating the divinity in all of it, and we're in acceptance and curiosity and compassion, those just move through a lot more quickly, which is kind of what we want in the first place. But it's approaching them from love and compassion and curiosity rather than fear, suppression, and judgment. This is an inclusionary universe. It's not a, you should only feel this. You don't go through and go, okay, I'm going to feel this and this and this, but oh, I don't feel that. Jealousy? Nope, you're out of here. So the antidote to getting overtaken by emotions and having lots of emotions, I mean, we can call them negative, but we can all admit there's emotions we prefer and emotions we don't prefer. But if we judge the emotions we don't prefer and we avoid the emotions we don't prefer, and we think in order to fit in, we're not allowed to feel the emotions we don't prefer, it actually prevents our integration and healing, but we become more and more blind to it. So it actually increases the shame that is the cause or the catalyst for those maladaptive behaviors in the first place, which is what I see a lot in certain spiritual, different religions, including New Ageism or spirituality. Again, I acknowledge that the word spirituality is very broad, and I'm using it in a very limited way.
So with similar to bypassing, can we discuss a bit more about the escapism or using spirituality as a way to escape emotions instead of bypassing them? And what would be also the role of shadow work within that?
Okay. So using spirituality as a way to escape in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad or negative thing. Because again, there's no wrong place to be on your healing journey. It's just more a curiosity of, so we often confuse feeling good with healing. So sometimes healing feels really good, and we should definitely chase our joy and chase our bliss and chase the things that we prefer. And that doesn't mean that we ignore or reject or avoid the things that we need to work on. Not that we need to work on them to be good enough, but we work on them because we are amazing. And we want to feel even more whole and integrated because it's way more fun. So, sorry, ask me the question again.
The question was about the escapism.
Escaping.
Yeah.
So we do want to sometimes chase our joy and chase things to make us feel good. And we also want to eat our shit sandwiches. So it's owning our awesome and owning our shit without making either of them mean anything. And when we go into certain practices or modalities, or we're like, I'm going to sound baths and yoga classes, and those things make me feel good, that is great. You should definitely do that. And are you doing it from a place of this is fun and I enjoy this and it makes me feel great? Or are we doing it to escape and avoid the things that we also need to look at?
How to
So it's
distinguish
like
them?
a both. We want to do both.
How can you distinguish whether you're escaping or not?
That's a really good question. Everybody's a little bit different. So I'm answering things in a very generalized way. I think you could just ask yourself, do I feel fearful? Do I feel easily triggered? Do I spend any time feeling uncomfortable? Is my life going amazing? Do I have, here's a great one. Are my finances amazing? Are my relationships amazing? Do I feel purpose? Do I feel whole? Do I feel excited and expanded and joyful? Not that we feel joyful all the time. That's not a KPI of success or enlightenment. That is just something that we definitely prefer and spend more time in the more we do that work that can be very uncomfortable. Like, remember my metaphor of growing a bigger bicep muscle. Sometimes when I go to the gym and I lift a heavier weight, that muscle gets very uncomfortable, right? And I go, oh, that's great. It's uncomfortable. That means I'm nailing it. Good job. But if I never feel uncomfortable and I just stay in my safety zone of, look, see, we're all lifting 5-pound weights together. Look how good I am at it. This is so great. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nowhere to be. Consciousness is infinite. Time is infinite, and it's a construct in this reality. Not that that doesn't mean it's real. It is real when we're experiencing it. But there's no rush. So if you are in that paradigm, that's okay. Don't make it mean you're not good enough. Just be curious about if your life is amazing. So a lot of people, what this looks like is a lot of people come to me, they're like, I've done breath work, I've done cold plunges, I've meditated, I've done 155,000 sound baths. I wear 19 crystal bracelets. I do all the things, I've done all the, but I still don't feel good. That would be a good indicator. And, or my relationships are still a mess, or I'm still frustrated, or I'm still, that could be. And we don't, now we could take that to the shadow side too, which I've definitely, absolutely done. I've done both. I've been on this end of the pendulum and that end of the pendulum, where I've done all love and light and been like, I'm not looking at anything. And then I've been in like I need to find it. I've done shadow hunting and been so focused on getting to the next stair and the next stair and the next stair that I don't have fun. So it's about finding that balance or fine line, which sometimes involves swinging the pendulum from here all the way over here and then going, oh, okay, probably it's somewhere around here. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, that's okay. It's okay. It's just information. And you can't, and if you want to stay in that phase for this whole lifetime, that's fine. You'll probably work on it in your next lifetime. Not because you're being punished, not because there's a punitive God, just because your higher self will be like, oh yeah, we took this course 5 times, we haven't really passed it yet. So how can I choose an incarnation where I'm really probably going to be immersed in it better? Like if my goal was to learn Spanish, but I'm, doing 5 minutes a week on Duolingo and not practicing it. And I was like, my soul came in to study Spanish. At the end of my life, I'd be like, okay, that I didn't do a lot of Spanish, but that was really what I wanted to do. So maybe next time I would choose to be immersed in Spain, or in South America, or or Mexico, or somewhere. I would say, I really want to learn this, so I'm going to go immerse myself in it because I'm not learning it this way. That's more how your soul looks at it, if that makes sense.
I also have a follow-up question on, you said about people that come to you where they have done all kinds of stuff. And one thing that I wrote down is like do versus feel. Can you maybe talk a bit more on the difference between, even like with spiritual practices, with doing them or practicing them just for the sake of kind of checking the box versus doing it with that intention of what it's supposed to do? Like, for example, with meditating just so that it's checked off of my to-do list of the day versus actually practicing it and doing it to actually get the outcome of it that you want to get.
Yeah. Well, I think first it would be questioning the energy behind the action is always my first go-to. So am I choosing this spirituality or self-help tool because I'm not good enough until I do it? or because I want to fit in. And if that's the case, that's okay. Just be curious about why you feel that way, and that's your indicator of where you need to do the work. Or you can ask yourself, am I doing it because it's fun and I'm really proud of myself and I know that I'm always going to grow, and this is the avenue that I choose? And the other thing is, not every tool is for every person. There's so many different ways to grow and heal. For some people, meditation is not their favorite tool. I also know people that are very skilled meditators, but they use meditation as escape. So I had a client who meditated for 2 to 4 hours a day for like a decade, but his life was a mess. So I would say that wasn't the right tool, or the tool was being used for the wrong reason, or it was a way to escape. So he was like, well, I'm fine when I'm meditating. You know, I'm in bliss states, but then this person said this, and then this money thing happened, and then this happened, and then that happened. So in that case, there might be a different tool that's perfect for you. For some people, breath work is a great tool. I like a very gentle breath work, but I don't like the really hard breath work, because with with symptoms that I've overcome in my life, my body doesn't necessarily have the extra energy to change all my oxygen levels and change everything else to balance my oxygen levels, because my body is just trying to stay alive. Whereas for somebody else, maybe it's the perfect tool for healing. So it's, do I enjoy the tool? Do I get benefit from the tool? And why am I using the tool?
And with that,
and am I using the tool to get more of my self-concept? Like to force myself to be something? Or am I being authentic? Because authenticity and vulnerability are actually the key to getting where everyone's trying to get. Or am I doing this to become enlightened? That's probably your ego. If you're like, I'm doing this so that I become enlightened, I'm doing this so I can, you know, again, it's your actions and intentions, or the reasons and intentions behind the action that are sometimes just helpful for us to examine, so that we can check if we're in alignment or not. So if you're meditating every day so that you can be a better lawyer, but you hate being a lawyer, and your marriage is terrible, and you keep it's like putting burn cream on and then touching the hot stove, putting burn cream on and touching the hot stove, putting burn cream on and touching the hot stove. Or if your mind is racing all the time because you have unaddressed ADHD, meditation might help. But if you're also doom scrolling Twitter for an hour a day, your brain's going to just constantly be in an overactive state if you're overstimulating it. So that's why the multidimensional model of our vehicle of consciousness is looking at which of the systems need optimization. Because if it doesn't matter how much gas you put in the gas tank, if the computer is malfunctioning, doesn't matter if it has a full tank of gas and the computer is running perfectly if you're driving it down crazy road, or you're driving it down a road that leads you to the ending that you never wanted. So it's starting to think in those more multidimensional models. So I spent years creating the magnetic masculinity blueprint after spending years alone in these states, downloading, writing thousands of sticky notes all over my house, figuring things out, trying things. And so if somebody followed that blueprint very diligently and with a lot of love and maybe a bit of enthusiasm and appreciation for themselves, the outcome would be that which people seek, which could be called enlightenment. I call it magnetic masculinity because it's less juicy for the ego to hold on to try to reach. So I don't ever think that should be the goal. I think that should be the outcome of authenticity, vulnerability, and compassion, and authentic alignment. And it doesn't matter how aligned you are and how living in your perfect self you are, if you have something in your environment that's disrupting your neural pathways or disrupting the electricity in your body, or you have a bunch of toxins in your liver or whatever it is. So again, it's looking at the multidimensional model, and am I using the right tool for the right job for the right reasons?
Yeah. I have a follow-up question with what you said about the chase what you prefer and also work on what you need to work on. Like, how can how can listeners find the balance between practicing spirituality, but then also real life, kind of not using spirituality as a way to avoid taking action in real life or bypassing? How can they find that balance? Because I feel like it can go to extremes in either way. One is you're so much in the real life that you completely ignore the spiritual side, or you're so much into spirituality that you're not present in the real life anymore.
Right. So I've definitely been in both ends of those pendulum swing. People constantly ask me, what are your spiritual tools? And I'm like, life, my relationship, taking care of my plants, noticing when I'm triggered, working on optimizing my health. So eventually we realize that every single thing we do is a spiritual practice. And if we treat every single thing we do like a spiritual practice, they will be. Now, when shit hits the fan, so to speak, that might be when I will double down. I'm like, okay, I need to spend some time in contemplation. I need some time in quiet. I need to double down on my nutrition. I need to get really good sleep. So I might double down on certain tools. I mean, I have like crystal singing bowls and all kinds of fun things in my house. I use them for fun. But for certain people, those can be their healing tool. And some tools, so sometimes when people come to me and they don't yet remember they are God, so to speak, and they're not in their power, they will project their power and light onto me or onto a different tool. And for a while, I will allow that, because if I tell them you're powerful, they're not going to believe me. So for a while, that can be very helpful. Or I could say, I have blessed this pen, and every time you write with it, your messages from your higher self will come through. And if somebody believes it, it will be true for them. Right? So we want to tap into it because it's our minds that are the creators. We are the powerful sculptors of our reality. But since most people are disconnected from their power, they will project it onto me or onto a tool. And I will allow that if it's helpful for them. But eventually I'll take those training wheels off and be like, guess what? If you enjoy that ceremony, dancing and smudging, and do it if it's fun, there's nothing wrong with it. But you know what is driving it is your belief in it. You are the power. You are the connection to the divine. You have all the power and potential to create outcomes. So sometimes it's, if we're constantly projecting our power onto a tool, that itself, do you see how that feels a little bit disempowering? It's like, oh, I need the singing bowls to raise my vibration because I'm so whatever. Sure, actually. And in some cases, some tools, I mean, crystals they're used in hundreds of pieces of scientific equipment because they do hold a steady charge. They're one of the most steady energy sources on the planet. That's not woo-woo, that's science. Liquid crystal displays on your TV, in microchips, in Timex quartz, we know, I don't know if this is still true, but the world clock used to be run on the power of crystals because it's the only thing that we know is constant and consistent. So there is value in certain tools. Like if you have something that is at a very high, not high as in better than, a very different frequency than your own, we know, like from experiments like Newton's cradle, where you have those little silver things go click, clack, tick, tock, click, clack. Eventually they'll all entrain to each other. So there can be a lot of help in energy entrainment. And the placebo effect, or the biology of belief, or whatever we want to call it, is also powerful. Now, we don't want to take that to an extreme where we're like, if I don't believe that McDonald's is bad for me, then it won't be. Well, we're also in a third dimensional reality that has a lot of collective rule sets and consensus rules. So we don't want to take that to the extreme, but we do have a window of probability where we can shift things this way or that way using the power of our minds. So at the end of the day, it's us that is more powerful than our spiritual tools.
I feel like you touched on here. We can also touch on another kind of spiritual trap, which is kind of relying too much on one spiritual teacher. So like one side of it would be the spiritual tools, which you already like addressed, but then it's also about I think the challenge there is because initially when you find your spiritual teacher or spiritual guide that can help you and you start to see results, it's easy to be attached to that or maybe find it hard to let it go because of those results that you initially got. Like how to find balance there.
Well, if it works really well for you, you don't necessarily have to let it go. You can refer back to it over and over again. What I would invite you to consider is that guru or spiritual teacher or self-help person reminding you how to be powerful, or are they for a long time allowing you to project your power onto them? So there's certain books that I'll go back and revisit every couple of years, and I'm like, oh, I got a new piece of information about it. So like, for instance, the magnetic masculinity blueprint, people could refer to that over and over and over. But if they also want to go out and seek, and it'll work for them, for most people, but if it doesn't work for you, go try other things. I do also sometimes see consuming so much information from so many different people, though, can also be an escapism. And it can also slow down your integration. So I would look more at the integrity of the information that you're getting from that person. And are they teaching you how to remember your own power and giving you tools so that you can have your own experience? Or are they wanting you to worship them and they are only love and light? If they are more authentic and they are like, yeah, and they're willing to sometimes get down in the trenches with you and be like, yeah, or I've done that, or I've been there, they're probably, possibly, not for sure, more in alignment with teachings that are going to help you become dependent. Not that we can't ever have that relationship, because if you have a close relationship that's a healthy, secure attachment with somebody, you don't necessarily need to let that go. You need to, hey, this person is standing in their light. This person is standing in their magnetic masculinity or their divine feminine. And by doing so, they're allowing other people to join them in their own. They're providing that light post.
How to identify if you're relying on them too much? Kind of like finding that balance between your internal and that like external, which like in this example would be like a teacher or a guru.
Well, that's a tricky one, because I'm going to say something that might not be super popular. It depends on the quality of your own internal voice. So if you're still in a lot of ego, which there's no problem with, and you don't have a lot of integrated parts, a lot of people have trouble discerning guidance from familiarity. Like it'll be like, go be in a relationship with that person. And then you get in a relationship with that person, you're like, oh my God, this is exactly this pattern I keep playing over and over. And it'll be like, exactly. So, or I've heard people say, oh, my intuition told me to move across the country, quit my job, and leave my family and children behind. Well, your children and your family are equally parts of source. So unless you were like doing damage to them, probably your higher wisdom didn't ask you to do that. That was probably your self-centered, unmet ego needs that you weren't meeting in a healthy way, which is why we want to meet our authentic wants, needs, boundaries, and values. Because if we're in that alignment, we're probably not going to over rely on anybody, but we're going to get our needs met from the people that we need to. But if we are in alignment, we're going to have people in our life that are in alignment. That's just kind of how it works. Or you're going to choose the very difficult path of being a way shower, or a, hey, here's all the pits I fell in and here's all the dragons I slayed. I'd love to help you get there quicker. If you choose that path, yeah, I think it's just really important that we constantly challenge our own integrity. And yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. And the last one that I wanted to touch on, which is also slightly similar to this one, is that trap of thinking that there's only like one right path to go, or to not achieve spirituality. Maybe in this case it might be that perspective, but to get to that like higher levels when it comes to spirituality.
Yeah, your more integrated version of yourself. So here's an important distinction. Okay, let's really reel this back for a minute. You already are all the things. You don't have to become more this, more that. You merely need to remove the distortions, delusions, filters, and ego, maladaptive ego between you and what you already are. You are divinity. You are literally a spark of source consciousness. That in and of itself is perfection. So you don't have to become something you're not. All you have to do is remember who you are and take action steps to behave more like that at a being level. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, definitely. All right, so that's the spiritual traps. Anything
Great.
you want to add?
No, feel free to ask any questions. Wherever you are is valid. And oh yeah, different paths. Let's actually touch a little bit more on that. I do think that's a very good question. So there's no wrong path. There's no wrong way to heal. There's no right path or right way to heal. All there is free will choices and outcomes. You try a flavor of the buffet and you go, no, I don't prefer that one. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. Even if you're surrounded by people that are like, that particular tool saved my life, cold plunges saved my life. Great. If they don't work for you, try a different flavor of the buffet. There's no wrong way to heal. And here's another sort of trap, potentially, actually, that I'll talk into, is sometimes the first people that you feel really at home or connected with could be a healing spirituality or self-help group, which is wonderful. You can practice that vulnerability and that connection and that closeness. But there can also be something, not always, that makes us want to stay in the state we're in, because how we get our needs met, right? We meet our needs. We either meet them in a healthy way or we create sneaky subconscious ways to meet them. So we want to meet our needs directly. So then the way we get our needs met is by healing, which involves we're never going to be healed. So we just want to, it's just something that we want to look at.
Yeah. All right.
Just be aware of.
Look out for it. Look out for it. All these.
Curious. Just be curious and compassionate. Curious and compassionate.
Yeah. And actually, if you identify any of these, you can comment them under YouTube if you're watching on YouTube, or let us know which ones have you identified, or how have you been dealing with them or experiencing them.
Yeah. And if you've watched this far, I do long, very in-depth episodes. And I just want to tell you that if you're listening to all of this, wherever you are is perfect. You are an evolutionary leader. You're already doing the work, and to trust your journey, stay patient, and just keep putting one foot in front of the other and finding things that you love to do, and finding things that light your soul on fire, and finding things that make you feel great. And all of the stuff that you're doing to work on yourself, make that eventually from a place of excitement and appreciation for yourself, rather than feeling not good enough, because you are already good enough. Otherwise you wouldn't exist.
Yeah. All right. We'll see you next week.
Okay. Bye for now.